Welcome back to my second installment on Explorations with Anthony Mosley, as I take a look at history as one of the topics that I'm exploring. I've got a wonderful cup of Michigan cherry coffee to enjoy this morning, put into a mug that my mother gave me for Christmas about 4 years ago, done by an independent artist out in California. She's from Florida. I'm from Florida originally and live in Fort Worth, but I'm drinking here in Texas this morning Michigan coffee in a California mug. So I'm feeling geographically diverse, but not as diverse geographically as this book, 1421, which deals with the year China discovered America. Fascinating book. Began to read this about a year and a half ago until I reached a point where it just became unbelievable to me in terms of what one person could discover compared to all the previous scholarship in the world when it comes to history and archaeology and navigation and all that type of stuff. This guy just luckily, according to his claim, made all these profound discoveries that showed that the Chinese fleet was here in America way before the Mayflower, here in the 1400s. After a while, it's just like, I don't know. How could one person just happen to discover some type of monument, stone monument in South America that had the perfect inscription that left clues to his next major discovery? So I put the book aside, started to do some reviews, and turns out there's not a whole lot of historical credibility behind that book. So I had a friend who looked at the first video that I did and said, "Hey, is that 1421 on the bookshelf behind you?" Yeah, why? Well, you might want to move that just so that you have more credibility as a historian. So it's gone. But let me just also make the claim that I have zero credibility as a historian. I'm just an average person who took high school and, going through junior high and high school and then college, of course, etc. But have rediscovered a passion for figuring out life and figuring out where all this stuff has come from. I'm fascinated with trends. Fast food restaurants, for example, they're all starting to look the same. I mean, a McDonald's no longer looks like a McDonald's. Taco Bell no longer looks like a Taco Bell. And I still lament the absence of the Burger Kings from the 70s with the beautiful tile roofs that they used to have, the terracotta tiles. But now even Arby's looks like you should go in and buy a cell phone there instead of buying fast food. And I'm trying to avoid fast foods, and it's not really an issue to me, but it's a fascinating trend. There's something going on behind the scenes that is causing that change to happen across the board in that industry. That intrigues me, and that's the same type of trend or pattern that I'm looking for in history, to just have a richer understanding of why things emerge as they did. I want to be able to walk into an art museum and take a look at a painting done in England in 1559, and hopefully I'm thinking this is the beginning of the Elizabethan era. It's an era that in section 1 of Durant's book, The Age of Reason Begins, was difficult for England. The whole book, the first of the 3 books in volume 7, is entitled The Ecstasy of England. And it reminds me of the movie 12 O'Clock High, if you've ever seen that, with Gregory Peck. It's one of those glorious World War II films where a general comes into a ragtag B-17 operation over in England and completely revamps it through effective leadership, builds morale, implements efficient procedures of operation, all that stuff. And by the end of the movie, you've got this sense of ecstasy. They've done it. They've achieved not just efficiency, but they've won the war as well. And you get that in sports movies as well, with head coaches taking over a team that hasn't won in forever, and they win the state championship, as in the basketball movie Hoosiers. Well, England, in a sense, had that significant transformation during the reign of Elizabeth I. The country was in shambles economically. The military was just horrible. And there was a lot of dissension when it came to religion. You might recall that Henry VIII introduced Protestantism when he wanted to divorce Catherine of Aragon. So he did away with the Pope and the Pope's authority and said, I'm going to be the head of the church, the Anglican Church. And then Edward VI carried on those Protestant reforms. And then Mary, known as Bloody Mary in history, she was the daughter of Henry VIII and Ferdinand and Isabel from Spain. So you get that Catholic influence from Spain. Mary did all she could to impose Catholicism or reimpose it on England. And had she reigned more than 5 years, she may well have in fact made England back into a Catholic country. But she failed. Elizabeth took the throne and went back to the Protestantism of her half-brother Edward and her father Henry VIII. And she reigned, of course, for 45 years. But half the nation was Catholic. So you've got religious dissension, you've got economic problems, you've got military issues, you've got foreign policy crises as you're stuck between Spain and between France, and she's doing her best to keep the enemies at bay as well. So in the second section, Elizabeth takes over, and this particular few pages that Durant explores looks at who was in her realm of government, who was in her cabinet, to use that term, and how the government actually functioned. So the key person is a guy named William Cecil, and I won't go into his background in depth, but here's a picture of Cecil, who ruled not really along with Elizabeth, but he was a very strong leader to the extent that many people thought that this guy was the guy who was really in charge of the monarchy, and that Elizabeth was nothing more than a figurehead. And that's not true, but you'll see the name William Cecil crop up a lot throughout the reign of Queen Elizabeth. The second element that I want to point out in this section is the presence of the Court of Star Chamber. And I'll put a picture on the screen here of what that chamber used to look like. Now, this is a wood engraving that was done in 1873 based on a painting that was done in the 1830s. But I believe it's the same room. And if you look up on the ceiling, you see that there is a star up on the ceiling, which was kind of in vogue at the time. Apparently, it was also in fashion to paint ceilings blue, this beautiful blue, and then to highlight the stars in gold. Anyway, back to the Star Chamber here, the wood engraving post. This is the place in which the government met behind closed doors and wielded absolute power. I mean, Elizabeth saw herself as ruling, in a sense, with divine right. You know, we saw the picture of her in the portrait with the globus cruciger, the cross, the dominion of Christ over the world, but held in the hand of the earthly monarch. And so she felt that she had absolute power, and she could use that power to protect the interest of the state, to protect the interest of the monarchy. And so they did. And in many cases, that resulted in a kangaroo court type operation. Didn't really matter what the evidence was or wasn't against a person. If she wanted to go after a member of parliament, then she could throw the weight of an 800-pound gorilla around and do as she wished and carry out the sentence as they saw fit. This term Star Chamber isn't in great use today, but if you search on YouTube, you will find even a U.S. House of Representatives member from Texas who talks about the U.S. government and certain branches of the government, which I will not mention on this video, who exert their power over citizens in ways that are behind closed doors and in ways that are unaccountable. So that's the whole concept of the Star Chamber, is just absolute authority that's unaccountable and often invisible to the public process. The sunshine laws of public exposure do not apply to the Star Chamber.